Hey everyone, how's it going today? And welcome to another episode. So, in today's episode, what I really want to talk about is pretty much the topic of minimum wage. And the reasoning why is because there are many states and cities around our country right now in the United States of America that are really trying to implement brand new bills in order to try to raise the minimum wage across the entire country. But just depending on the specific state that we're talking about. We obviously already know, if you've been following this channel by now, is that inflation is a ongoing crisis that is happening in our country right now, that's basically just universally everywhere. But one of the plans that they really hope to do is that in order to combat this inflation situation, they're hoping to raise minimum wage. And in particular, one city and state/city that really comes to mind is probably going to be the city that I come from, which is going to be in New York City, which is where I'm based, where they are now trying to raise minimum wage to $30 per hour by 2030. So this is going to be pretty legit to have a minimum wage rate of $30 per hour. So in today's video, what I really want to talk about is really explaining the story to what these new bills are about. I want to focus a lot on New York City because they're doing the greatest amount of minimum wage hike, making it $30 per hour. But a lot of the stuff that I share, even if you're not from New York, is still going to universally apply to almost every other state, because if all the other states start to raise their minimum wage as well and follow suit, then a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today, such as like the benefits of this, the consequence, the cons, the pros, the cons about this, is all going to be universally the same, in terms of how this is going to impact our overall economy. So with that said, let's just get right to this video. But as always, if you guys want to share some support, like, comment, subscribe, and let's get started. So the new bill that we really have to talk about, that we're going to be focusing today's video, but again, this is going to apply to a lot of other states as well because there's other bills to talk about. But the one that we're really going to be focusing on is a brand new bill called the New York City Minimum Wage Act. So literally New York City Minimum Wage Act. As the title suggests, what this is going to do is that it's going to apply to New York City, where the current minimum wage is set at $17 per hour at the time of the making of this video in 2026. And what's going to happen is that under this brand new bill, if approved, it's going to gradually raise the minimum wage rate to $30 per hour, so gradually over the next 5 years until 2030 for employers with 500 or more employees, and then for smaller businesses to raise their minimum wage to $30 per hour as well until 2032. So in other words, if you are someone that's currently working for a very large corporation that's 500 employees or more, then in the next 5 years, you're going to see minimum wage gradually hike from $17 per hour to about 20 to 23 to 26, and finally ending up at $30 per hour in 2030. And if you are someone that works for a smaller business of just say a company that has less than 500 employees, then you're also going to see your minimum wage rate raise up to $30 per hour, only there's going to be a little bit more time where they're going to raise it up by 2032. So now 7 years instead of 5 years. And while it is true that, right now we're just focusing this bill on New York City, it is expected that there's going to be a lot of other states and cities that will follow creating their own bill as well in order to raise their own minimum wage as well, in order to combat the rising cost of living and inflation and everything that we obviously have been living through. If you have just been following general financial news for the last several years, you probably already know where I'm going at this. But with all of this stuff said, there's going to be also a thing where they might also depend it based on your industry specifics. So for example, some industries, they might try to raise the minimum wage even further. Other industries, they might try to cool it down a little bit more. So it just really depends, but this is what's really going on universally across New York City. And what's happening is that other states are expected to also follow suit. Maybe not necessarily $30 per hour, but in the sense that they're also going to be raising minimum wage in their state as well. But maybe now to take a transition and talk a little bit about some of the pros about this and then some of the cons about this, so the benefits and then the consequence. The biggest benefit that this is going to do for our country is that obviously it means that if you are working a minimum wage job, especially for a lot of entry-level people, because a lot of people that are in the entry-level positions, that are working entry-level jobs or even just part-time jobs as students, they do pay near minimum wage. So under this brand new bill, it's going to be very, very nice because it's going to allow them to potentially collect even more money to help pay for things such as like bills and expenses. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts at any time during this video. But with that being said is that while it is true that the pros are obviously more money in our pockets, being able to finally use that money to pay for bills, necessities, in theory, it's a really, really great idea. But with that being said, there are also going to be some cons and consequences that could potentially come about from this situation that we really have to explore. And one of them is going to be the potential impact to the labor market. So this one is very important because although it is true that, people are going to get more money if they're employed, one of the downsides of this bill is that it is expected that because if they start to increase labor costs and make it more expensive for companies to hire people, it's going to incentivize a lot of businesses and companies but potentially want to try to cut costs. And one of the areas that they're going to cut costs is labor. They're going to cut labor costs by essentially laying off people and leading to the destruction of tons and tons and maybe even thousands or tens of thousands of jobs inside of our country. But in this case, again, specifically New York City in particular. So it's going to be impactful because at the very end of the day, one of the things, and again, I'd love to hear your thoughts like mentioned, is that many people have talked about how although it's nice to have higher minimum wage, when you're not employed, then minimum wage becomes kind of useless. Because if you're not employed, your minimum wage is effectively $0 per hour because you're not making any money. So what this is going to do is that the benefits is that it is going to lead some people to make a lot more money. But the downside to this bill is that it's also going to lead to a lot of people ending up unemployed because a lot of jobs will potentially now disappear because of what's going on right now. So just some thoughts to really consider. Higher money but less people employed, or less or essentially no money because of higher unemployment rates. And that's one of the biggest things. The other big consequence that I think not a lot of people are talking about, and this is something that's already starting to happen, is really about the impact of AI. Because of what's going on, it's also going to incentivize a lot of companies to try to start to implement AI and adopt it into their workforce so that they're going to potentially hire even less people now as well. So not only are a lot of companies going to be cutting out labor, leading to higher periods of unemployment because of higher minimum wage, but it also does mean that they're going to also be more incentivized to try to adopt AI in order to cut labor costs even further than they've already costed. So that's really just another big thing that's really going to potentially be impacted. Now, the next thing I really want to talk about is going to be more about how this is going to impact the overall economy. And this one's important because if you can probably guess where I'm going with this, is that because if you start to increase minimum wage and then you start to lead to higher periods of unemployment, what's ultimately going to happen is that as more people become unemployed, it's going to lead the wealth gap to become even greater than it already is. We already know that essentially the middle class has already been shrinking for the last several years, and that the rich have been getting richer while the poor have been getting poorer. But this is going to potentially lead to an even widening of the income gap. And the reasoning why is that because going back is that for those that are employed and able to successfully find a job, they're going to be making more money and getting even richer. But sadly, because it's going to displace so many people out of work now and lead to the destruction of so many jobs, it means that the poor people that are struggling to find employment are just going to be struggling even harder now to find employment because of the less jobs and the increase in greater competition there will ever be now for those few jobs that even exist. So that's why this is very, very impactful. It also does mean, keep in mind, that if more people fall into the poverty level, it means that even more people are going to be required or that are now going to be forced onto government programs. Things such as like food stamps, SNAP benefits, government housing, government support services, programs, unemployment benefits, right? And at the very end of the day, the money has to come from somewhere and the math has to all check out, because at the end of the day, like anything in business, it all comes down to the math. The money, the math, and whether or not it checks out and works out. And so in order to fight the fact that so many different cities and states around our country is going to have to see so many people enter into periods of unemployment, having to now rely on government benefits and programs in order to survive. It does mean that all of that money or all of these programs have to come from somewhere, right? So what's ultimately going to happen is taxes might potentially increase, because if they don't increase taxes, that money needs to be used to pay for all of these programs and stuff that people need in order to stay afloat in life. So not only are taxes going to potentially be increasing because of this situation, but it also does mean that if the taxes ultimately raise up and things become a lot more expensive, inflation is going to potentially go up now with it as well, leading to even more inflation long term. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that because if employers or companies know that it starts to be more expensive to hire workers, they might also potentially lead that cost and put that cost into the cost of their own goods and services that they have, leading to even greater inflation. So just some things to really think about some of the consequences and cons and downsides to if they end up deciding to raise the minimum wage. So it is something that's going to be great for some people, but I think it's just so important to really take away the consequence that might potentially happen if they really do end up raising minimum wage to $30 per hour for New York City, but honestly also just around the country in general. But beyond that that's pretty much most of what I really wanted to share in today's video. So just talking about some of the benefits and then the consequences and cons to raising minimum wage. But of course, I'd love to hear your guys, opinions and thoughts. Feel free to share any down in the comments down below. Do you guys support raising minimum wage? Do you guys support not raising minimum wage? Or rather yet, if you do support raising minimum wage, by how much do you think minimum wage should be before it becomes too much and have that massive impact to the economy of everything that we've been talking about, between things like unemployment, higher inflation, higher cost of living, higher price of goods, labor's, companies, jobs, economies, everything being impacted right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. And also try to stay employed. But yep, hope to see you guys next time.